Okay, amazing. Let's get going. So a very big welcome, everyone, to today's Function Focus webinar on the European Pay Transparency Directive and how SAGE can support and help you prepare for its requirements. In today's session, we will explain what the European Pay Transparency Directive is, what it may require of employers, and most importantly, how SAGE can help you prepare, evidence your approach, and respond with confidence. So we will start with Philippa Wallace today, SAGE's Total Reward Director, discussing a broad overview of the directive. So what it is, why it has been introduced, and what it means for employers. We will then hand over to Chris Deutschman, one of SAGE People's Senior Solution Consultants, to walk us through a short demonstration showing you how SAGE People can support you in practice, as well as signposting key resources to help you plan and implement any changes required. Throughout the session, please feel free to raise any questions. We will have time at the end dedicated for a Q&A. If we're unable to answer any questions during today's session, we will of course follow up and share the responses alongside the recording on YouTube and the SAGE People community next week. If you do experience any technical issues during the webinar, please try and leave and rejoin. If the issues persist, please feel free to post in the Q&A chat and we'll do our best to assist. But again, as I said, this session is being recorded and will be available on YouTube and the SAGE People community as of next week. I'd now like to hand over to Philippa to start us off with the overview of the EU Pay Transparency Directive.
Hello there, my name is Philippa Wallace. I'm the Total Reward Director here at SAGE. And I'm here today to talk a little bit about the European Pay Transparency Directive and what it might mean for you. If I run through the agenda, today we're going to cover what does the EU Pay Directive mean for employers, why it matters, core employer obligations, a little bit of a summary there, some key dates and deadlines, and then I'm going to
seem to have lost sound, Sam.
hand over to my colleague Chris, who is going to give an overview of how SAGE People can help. So, EU Pay Transparency, what it means for employers. So, an EU-wide law, which was published in 2023, it enforces equal pay for equal work and equal value. It applies to all employers with EU-based workers, and is designed to close the average 13% gender pay gap in Europe. The directive introduces transparency and accountability into pay decisions across the EU. So some of these concepts aren't new concepts. Equal pay has been around for a long time, but the equal pay for equal work and equal value is quite a new concept. Why the European Transparency Directive matters to employers: it has strong enforcement for equal pay for equal work of equal value, the new transparency rights for employees and clear obligations for employers, and increased scrutiny across hiring, pay decisions and progression. So pay decisions that were once internal now need to be explainable, defensible and reportable when this comes into effect. Some of the core obligations. So the EU Pay Transparency Directive is new legislation designed to reduce the unjustified pay gaps and strengthen fairness in the workplace. It introduces clear rules requiring employers to be transparent about pay, provide employees with information on how their pay compares to others doing work of equal value, and takes action and for employers to take action where gaps cannot be justified. The work of equal value is something that we see throughout the directive, and the European Union have published a job evaluation toolkit on the 26th of March. The purpose of that toolkit is to give a robust guide to employers on how to evaluate roles for that comparison purpose, and to try and obviously reduce that gap, which is the aim of the directive itself. I'll cover some of the core obligations here and on this slide through these variant boxes, and we've split the obligations into set categories. So The directive introduces some obligations before employment. For example, salary information will be provided before interviews to candidates, and candidates can no longer be asked about their pay history. So that's the first sort of category. For employees gain the right to request information on their individual pay and the average pay broken down by gender for workers doing work of equal value. Gender pay gap reporting, so employers with more than 100 employees must report gender pay gaps data regularly. If the pay gap exceeds 5% and cannot be objectively justified, employers must take corrective action. Where significant pay gaps persist, so that's those gaps above 5% that cannot be objectively justified, employers must undertake joint pay assessments with employee representatives to analyse and address the causes of those gaps. There is strong enforcement and remedies. So employees benefit from the reversal of the burden of proof. So employers must prove compliance, which is very new. And compensation rights for victims for pay discrimination have been covered in the directive as well. What we are seeing, and I know I mentioned earlier the job evaluation toolkit that the European Union have published recently, but there's really much clearer definitions on what is classified as equal work, and data-driven pay structures also need to be more transparent. So the job evaluation toolkit focuses on things like value and skills, effort, responsibility, for comparison purposes, and it also gives information about pay structures. They must be based on objective, gender neutral criteria. From a timeline perspective, there is a bit of a difference depending on how many employees you have within a entity country across the EU. So implementation and reporting. So 2026, the directive should be implemented by the 7th of June 2026. All EU member states must implement the directive with internal structures ready to reduce compliance risk. What we've seen currently is different countries approach this in slightly different ways and are publishing draft legislation. We are still waiting for several countries to do that, and obviously the 7th of June is when the European Union have stipulated that all countries must have something in place by. So 2027 will be the first time reporting is required. So from the 7th of June 2027, large organisations which have been set as organisations with more than 250 employees need to start their annual pay gap reporting. Medium organisations report every 3 years. In 2031, expanded reporting. So 7th of June 2031, organisations with between 100 and 149 employees must commence their reporting, requiring early preparation and data maturity. Transparency for smaller employers, so employers with fewer than 100 employees must ensure transparency in employee pay rights despite no mandatory reporting. So a lot of the other obligations that we've covered would still be in place. I'm going to now pass over to my colleague Chris, who is going to talk through how Sage people can support you to comply with the directive. Thank you very much.
Great, excellent. So Chris, if you could take us through how Sage people can support you with the directive before we end with the questions.
Thanks, Sam. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Good afternoon, everyone. Right, Sam, if you can go on to the next slide for me, please. So we're just going to talk through a couple of the sort of functionality areas of Sage People that can be used to support the directive, and then we'll dive into a little bit of a demo of some of this configuration in Sage People. So to kind of support the equal work for equal pay, we first of all need to understand what is equal work, right? So in Sage People, we have a number of sort of different areas of functionality that can help guide on this. So we have job profiles. These are sort of sections of the system where employees can be linked to a profile, which describes their competencies and their skills that are required for a job. And if you've got a strong job profile in place, it's then quite easy to sort of see which roles are doing similar types of work. Similarly, job library, slightly sort of less detailed than the job profile. This typically works on things just like job titles, grades, potentially salary bands. That can also be a good way of identifying work of similar value. And then job libraries can be also linked to your job profiles for more granular detail, and also linked to job descriptions. So we have a number of different facilities within the system to be able to help with those identification points. Then another sort of important piece into the process is actually understanding salary ranges and some benchmarking. So for this, we obviously have the salary bands within Sage People. This will allow you to actually create salary bands for different roles, for different countries. So that's giving you that benchmark data, bottom, middle, and top of the range type of salaries. And from there, you can actually see where each employee sits within those ranges, just from a general position within that salary band, percentage-wise, and which quartiles they fall into. And these are linked to individual team members, and it can be done again via the job library to automate some of these processes. We can go on to the next slide, please, Sam. All right, and then just a couple of other things that sort of Philippa called out in her slides as well. Obviously, on the recruitment side, it's important that salary ranges are either published in job postings or communicated to candidates very early on in the recruitment process. So if you are using the Sage People recruit portal, as you'll see there on the right-hand side, they've highlighted there the salary that can be brought in, a salary range for that particular role. So it's giving that information upfront and easily to potential candidates. Additionally, paid confidentiality clauses in contracts are also prohibited under the directive. So you need to have a look at your job offers and employment contracts. Make sure that there's nothing in those documents that are sort of banning employees from discussing their pay with their peers, as that will sort of be frowned upon. And as sort of Philippa mentioned earlier, you cannot ask candidates about previous pay. You can ask them what they're expecting to get paid, but you can't ask them about previous pay directly. All right, then other parts of the directive also sort of cover employee rights. We need to be able to communicate to employees on a regular basis about their rights under the directive and how they would actually request their data to be shared with them. And I'll show you in the system in a few minutes how we can do that. Obviously, controlling the access to this pay level data and average pay by gender, etc., for comparable roles is important. And here, obviously, within Sage People, within sort of the guise of profiles and permission sets and personas, we can make sure that data is only available to those that are authorized to see the data. And again, as kind of Philippa mentioned, the shift of that burden of proof moves to the employer in pay discrimination claims. So the employers need to be really clear about the data that they have and making sure that they have data to justify why there may be some discrepancies in pay. All right, next one, please, for Sam. Okay, and then obviously reporting and audit. So we'll just dive in, when I get to the demo, we'll dive into some dashboards and reporting that can also help you making sure that you're getting the right data out of the system to meet those auditing requirements when they are published by the different EU countries. All right. Okay, I'm going to take over quickly and share my screen, and then we can actually dive into the system. All right, so in Sage People at the moment, and what we have put together is a proof of concept of the type of calculations and information that we can get out of Sage People to assist with the pay transparency calculations and reporting. So at the moment, I'm looking at a particular employee, Elodie. If I sort of expand this out, Elodie is female, 34 years of age. She's based in France. And she had a start date about 6 years ago, been with the company just over 5 years, and she's a full-time employee. Now, if we start drilling down into Elodie's detail, we can see that she is a senior engineer. So this is where I've brought in the job library to be able to categorize everybody that's doing a similar role. So in this case, she's a senior engineer and her job profile is a software engineer. So those are sort of 2 data points that we can use to identify people doing similar jobs. She's currently obviously in the EU, so being paid in euros, and her current salary is just over 46,000. Now, what the EU Pay Transparency Directive says, we should be able to calculate what the average salary is and what the median salaries are for employees across a range of these jobs. Now, I've done this on just purely based on salary. As different countries reduce their legislation, the items that would be brought into that calculation could differ from country to country. So it might include salaries, bonuses, benefits, etc. And if that information is held within Sage People, obviously that can be brought into these calculations as well. So if we just have a look at the overall picture for Elodie quickly. So overall, for everybody that's in a senior engineer role, the average pay or compensation is 56,000 euros, whereas Elodie is only being paid 46,000 euros. So effectively, she has a gap of minus 9,000 euros, give or take, that she's being paid less than her peers. And that translates to a 17% variance. And remember from Philippa's section earlier, there is a kind of a benchmark on 5%. So if the variance is greater than 5%, we need to be able to justify this. So in this case, there should be a good reason as to why Elodie is earning a fair amount less than what her peers are earning. You can do similar calculations on the median values. So again, similar kind of thing here. 55,400 is the median. And again, there's still a gap there of about 8,500 euros and a gap of just under 16%. So that's looking at it from an overall perspective. And then we can do similar calculations for just the female population, so we can understand what that looks like. So these numbers look slightly better and the variances are slightly lower. But as we do know, because there is generally a trend in most areas, females are slightly underpaid, and that's one of the sort of ideas behind the directive is to reduce this pay gap. You know, it is still showing us that there is a gap, and obviously it's a sort of fairly similar gap to what the overall gap was. So similar kind of calculations can be done on this level. And if we wanted to sort of compare Elodie to the male population to get a true understanding of what's going on, we can do that as well. And here we can actually see that variance has gone up to over 18%. So it's really showing us we do have a problem in this particular area with this particular employee and maybe others in that similar role. We can also bring in the salary banding here. So I did show you a bit of an example on that earlier on, but for this particular role here, we can actually see now what the banding is for this role, starting at 51,000 and going up to 85,000. So that in itself is an indication to us that Elodie is actually being paid a non-marketable salary, unfortunately. And again, you can see that her current salary is at 46,000, which is 13% below the bottom of the band. So again, we have some information here to tell us that we need to look at what's going on with this particular employee. Now, as Philip also said, there might be situations where there is genuinely going to be a reason for this underpayment. So it might be something, for example, Elodie is actually quite new in this role. She's just completed an apprenticeship. So that would be some reason, one of the reasons potentially why she's being paid a lower salary than others in the same role. So here, Sage People is giving you the opportunity to be able to do these calculations, but then also record sort of the justifications or the reasoning behind why different people are being paid different salaries. So that's looking at it from sort of the back end perspective, I suppose, from an HR team doing the calculations and understanding what's going on. If we then sort of move across to the employee side, so in self-service, what we can do here is we can actually now proactively publish the information about the directive to our employees and what their rights are. So in this particular instance here on self-service on the front page, I've got a tile there for the EU pay transparency. If I click through that, that's going to give me detail around what the directive is and what it means for me as an employee. So you can put that information out there and you're fulfilling one of those requirements of actually being transparent to your employees and telling them what their rights are. From here, we can actually track whether employees are reading this as well. So they can click on the confirm button. That will track in the background for us that they have read this. And we can actually also sort of do a kind of scoring type of thing where they can actually acknowledge that they've read it. Yes, I have read it, and save that. And that will actually then get logged into the system as well. So that when it does come to audits and such like, we can prove that we have been proactive in sharing this information with our employees. Now, one of the things that we can do again through Sage People is we can give our employees the option to request their information, right? So that is one of the things that needs to happen under the directive. And generally the organization needs to respond within a fairly short space of time. 2 months is the current guideline. So what we can do here is use the forms functionality within Sage People. So under policies or forms, wherever you might have it in your current installation, you can go in there, we can create a new form, and I can just simply say I've got a pay transparency request and start that form. Now this is just a very straightforward form. All that this is the employee acknowledging their right to request their information and that fact that they're exercising that right. So they tick the box, happy with that, and basically we are acknowledging that we have received that. Now we'll cover this in a few minutes when I get to the dashboards, but in the background we can now be tracking this information that's coming in. We know who's requested information, and then we can start getting that information out to them. And just as I suppose a way of being able to show that information to employees, one can have automations that run in the background. We've got the functionality of PDF templates in the system. So what we could be doing is into sort of employee notes or supporting documents, whatever you might have called it within your implementation of Sage People, you could be bringing in a document. So this can be auto-generated either directly when the employee requests that information, or it can be generated by the HR team once they've actually had a chance to review the information and make sure that they're happy with the information that's going to be shared to the employee. So from here, we can put that detail into the employee notes, and they could then open up, oops, sorry about that. Don't know why that happened. That should have opened up a PDF. I'll open it up in a second. That'll open up a PDF document, which will have the information in there for me, giving me that clear view of where I am within the roles. Right, and then finally, if we go back to Sage People, the HR portal side of things, we've got all of this data in the system now. Now we can actually start doing something with this. So here we can actually bring this into dashboards. So from an HR team's perspective, we can see what our gender split is across the workforce, what those mean and median pay gaps are. We can see how our gender pay splits across all the different quartiles of those salary bands for the median salaries and average salaries. Now, importantly, we can also see how many employees we've got where they've exceeded that 5% pay gap. So in this case, 15% or 15 of our male employees and 10 of our female employees have got gaps that are higher than 5%. So again, this is helping the relevant teams identify which employees have got gaps that need to be reviewed, and again potentially justifications added in, maybe as with LED, new in roles, just completed apprenticeships, etc. And then finally, just a sort of managing the data that's out there and those requests from employees. We can actually be bringing in data of the confirmation. So every time somebody confirms one of those notifications about what their rights are, so we can be tracking that. So in this case here, a fair majority of my employees have acknowledged that they have read that document, but there is still a gap of about 20% people who haven't read the document. And then those actual requests, how many people have clicked the button and submitted that form and requested the data. So in this case, I've got 63 employees that have requested data. So this just helps HR teams to be able to be proactive on this, manage the data, find risks, and then actually monitor the data requests that are coming in, and being proactive about that. All right, so that sort of brings the demo part to an end. Hopefully that sort of gives you some idea as to what we are able to do in the system for you. Now, at this point, we don't know what every single EU country is going to ask as far as reporting is concerned, as Philippa mentioned in her segment. A lot of the legislation hasn't been finalized yet. It's still going through draft legislation, etc. So once we know a bit more about what legislation is going to be finalized in each country, we can probably give a bit better guidance on this. But this is giving you that starting point of understanding what the system can do for you to help you comply with the legislation when it comes into being in a couple of months. All right. Not sure if we've got any questions that have come up, Sam.
And I'm just looking now. No, I don't think we've got any questions so far.
You have had some, Sam.
Oh, okay,
So-
great, excellent.
I can read them out if you like. So Nils has asked, when recruiting across multiple markets or countries with different currencies, how could those multiple salary ranges reflect in the job ad via the candidate portal?
That's a good question, Niels. I would probably, if I had to do that, something like that across multiple countries, and you have a single vacancy for that, I would probably roll those up into a single text field and then put that text field onto the job advert rather than individual sort of currency fields, if that makes sense.
Thanks, Chris. I'll let Nils comment if there's any further questions on that. But we've had another one from Celine, who said, mean and median pay gap, does it take into account the whole org or only the country?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Celine. So because obviously cost of living, etc., and such like in different countries is going to be different, the calculations that I've built and the proof of concept that I've built is that this would be done per country, because obviously, salaries in somewhere like Portugal is going to be very different to salaries in a country like, Germany, France, etc. So, and obviously each of those countries is treating this individually, and the reporting on this will be by country. So the calculations are done country by country. They could even be brought down more granularly if needed in some areas. But yeah, at the moment it's country by country that would take place, because the reporting would be country level rather than entire EU level.
Perfect. Thanks, Chris. Nils has asked kind of a similar question about comparing with one country, or how it work in job profiles that utilize multiple countries, but I think you've answered that with that. So just go to the last question that I can see. Selena's asked, how do you calculate the bottom and ceiling of each pay bracket, and where did you get that information from? I think that's referring to the salary bands you showed, Chris. Yeah,
I think so. So Celine, generally organizations would be working with a third party with this. So, salary banding information on roles can be sort of bought from a lot of benchmarking organizations. I won't mention any names here, just for fear of discriminating against some, but or promoting some, but generally there are different different benchmarking organizations that will cover different industries, different countries. So yeah, that the information that I had there was generic examples as such, but the idea would be that you would be looking at sort of industry specific data in the country that you or countries that you're in.
Yeah, and then they can be data loaded into the salary band object within Sage People to then use in your
Correct.
data.
Yeah,
perfect.
correct.
Thank you. We've had a couple more questions as well while we've been answering those, Chris. So
Sure.
Charlotte has asked, on the final dashboard screen from the demo, was there a screen that shows immediately where there is a 5% or more difference between men and women at group or job role / level, rather than just individual 5% differences?
I'm not quite sure I understand the question.
Do you want me to reread it?
Yeah.
Have you got it? So it says, on the final dashboard screen from the demo, was there a screen that shows immediately where there is a 5% or more difference between men and women at group or job role level, rather than just the individual 5% differences, which is not what the directive is about in itself?
So the 5% that I was showing is anybody whose compensation was more than 5% outside of the average for their role in their country. Now, obviously, if you're wanting to drill down in that a bit more, then one could do that.
Yeah. So because you're looking at your job library item to calculate that's what you're using to calculate the 5% difference, right? So it just will all be in the configuration on setting that up.
In the configuration, exactly.
Yeah. Perfect. Thanks, Chris. And then we've had one final question to say, will there be any instructions on how to build this within Sage People?
So we will be able to sort of give you some guidelines of how to do some of the automation. We haven't made a final decision of whether we're going to package this up in a generic sort of type of solution or not. Again, we're just waiting on some more detail around the legislation in the different countries, and see if there's actually something that we could be doing that's a sort of 90% fit for most countries or not. But that's all dependent on how the legislation gets passed in each of the areas.
Makes sense. Thank you. And I think we've got customers that are already using Job Library, whereas others might not be using that just yet. So it's going to be a bit of a variation between our customer base on what they need to do exactly. Yeah,
correct. And then added to that is the different components that would sort of form the compensation that's being compared. So in some organizations, it might just simply be things like salaries and bonuses. Other organizations, they might choose to bring in additional information, maybe benefit values and things like that, maybe allowances that employees are receiving. So it can be quite a wide range of data points that need to be taken into account. But again, so that's why we are waiting on final legislation, and then obviously each individual organization needs to interpret that as well and figure out what they want to bring in, because each business might have different things that they're using. Yeah,
definitely. And I keep saying one more question, but we're having more coming as we're talking, so you're clearly getting people thinking. Pippa has asked, she said, we currently don't use job profiles or libraries, so sorry for the question, but can these be different for different policies? So different job profiles or libraries for different policies, is that possible?
So the job libraries and profiles are not generally linked to different policies. What I would sort of suggest is you start looking at potentially something like job libraries if you're wanting different jobs for different areas or different countries. The best solution there would probably be in the naming convention of those jobs, to differentiate a job that's maybe in one country versus another country, and that potentially be linking to your policies as such. But yeah, generically, sort of job library and job profiles are not directly linked to a policy, so you'd have to be potentially a little bit creative of how you split that out.
Very helpful, thank you, Chris. And that is it from the questions, from what I can see.
Amazing. So a big thank you to everyone for joining today. Like I said, any of the questions that we've went through today, along with the answers, will be uploaded along with the recording on the community and YouTube next week. So keep an eye out for that. But yeah, I hope everyone has a lovely rest of the day, and thank you very much for joining.
Thanks, Sam.